So, welcome to this edition of Seen and Solved, presented by Hubbard-Hall. I'm Tim Pennington, editor of finishingandcoding.com. And today we're going to be talking with Carter Burningham. He was the director of supply chain at Hubbard-Hall, and we're going to talk on the topic of semiconductors. I'm Tim Pennington, and you're listening to Seen and Solved, brought to you by Hubbard-Hall. Better results, less chemistry. Carter, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yes. So how long have you been at Hubbard-Hall, may I ask? 'Cause I know it's been several years, correct?
Yeah, it's been about 3.5 years that I've been here at Hubbard-Hall.
Okay, great. Well, give us a little bit about your background and how you wound up there, and if you had any other experience in finishing or whether it was just in chemicals. Give us a background if you could.
Yeah. So I'm originally born and raised Salt Lake City, Utah. Attended the University of Utah. I got my undergrad in finance. And shortly after graduating there, I got a role as a procurement analyst for a company called Sun Products, and was working in the chemical world as an analyst, and then worked my way up as a buyer eventually. And then in 2016, that company was acquired by Henkel, and Henkel said, "Hey, we want you to work for us, but we need you to move out to Connecticut. So if you're interested, come on out." So I moved my family out to Connecticut, and shortly thereafter found out that the position I was in wasn't the greatest fit for me, and was fortunate to find Hubbard-Hall. So in 2019, I started as a director of procurement here at Hubbard-Hall, and then in 2020 became the director of supply chain, and so I brought on the customer service team under my umbrella. So that's how I now have the title of director of supply chain. And then in this year, earlier 2022, we had some positions and roles and responsibilities change, and I was handed the responsibility for managing our semiconductor strategic customers. So still director of supply chain, and now getting my feet wet in the semiconductor industry and really managing those relationships.
Gotcha. This has not been the year to be a supply chain director, or last year, right? I mean, it's like,
yeah, it's
I'm not
a
sure.
year if you want to lose hair, you can clearly see, but it's been stressful for sure.
Right. So tell us about being a supply chain director. Who are you talking to every day? What are you looking for? What keeps you up at night? What are you doing there? Explain that to us.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Over the last 2 years, living in the supply chain world has been stressful and challenging, and it's been about survival mode, really making sure that we're securing the raw materials and components and parts that we need to keep our business running. So what that looks like on a daily basis is getting the orders here on time and in full that we've requested from our suppliers. And as you know, over the last 2 years, that hasn't been the easiest of things given all the constraints and challenges globally. So the last 2 years, my job has looked a little bit differently than it normally does, but it's been more about ensuring the continuity of supply. So making sure that we're following up with our suppliers and getting product here on time, communicating with those suppliers, and making sure that we're dealing business with the reputable suppliers who can live up to the commitments that we make with them. So it's been less about negotiating price and contracts the last couple of years, and more about survival and continuity of business continuity.
Right. Yeah, it's been a rough year for everybody. Like I said, it's really the uncertainty is, I think, the biggest question is, you get promises, and then things don't come out. And there's so many factors, I guess, that really are playing into this. So
Right.
Yeah, it's got to be like I said, every day is probably going to be a challenge of making sure you get things in, because unless you see it, unless you get it in, you probably don't know if it's really going to be there. But that's got to be the hardest part. So let's talk about semiconductor, the industry, because Hubbard-Hall is heavily into that, supplying chemistry in that market. So tell us a little bit about that history of how long Hubbard-Hall has been specializing in the semiconductor market with that.
Yeah, so the way that Hubbard-Hall entered into the semiconductor space was acquiring a business over 20 years ago, particularly up in the Massachusetts area, where we have a strong presence with the semiconductor players in that geographical region. And it's fits our business because it is commodity chemistry that most of these fabs are using. So it fits our mold and it fits what we're trying to do as a business. But it was a bolt-on 20 years ago through an acquisition. And quite frankly, it's been a really good fit for the organization as we deal in these types of chemistries for a lot of our other customers as well, as a chemical distribution company.
Right. Talk about some of the products, though. I mean, are these pre-treatment cleaning, or what type of products are they for that industry?
Yeah, so the semiconductor space, it starts as a wafer. It's a large disc, and it's made of metal, and it has to be treated so that that wafer can then be cut into chips. And so the chemistry that we're supplying into there is metal etchant chemistry. A lot of acids, sulfuric acid, phosphoric acid, isopropyl alcohol, and so forth, that allow that metal to be treated so that it can then be produced into making a chip. And then we also have some chemistries that help on the wastewater treatment at those facilities. So not only are they making those chips and the wafers, but they then have to then treat treat the water that's going out the back door. So we're playing in that space where we give them and provide them those chemistries to treat the wastewater at the facility.
Right. Okay. Great. It's funny. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Add more.
I was going to say one other thing is not only just commodity chemistry, but we've got strategic relationships with suppliers who decades of relationships that provide specialty products for these fabs that are working with engineers on a daily basis to design new chemistries that can help optimize and improve efficiencies at those fabs. So we're supplying the commodities, but we're also supplying and representing those strategic suppliers who help with the new innovation and projects that they're working with those engineers at the fabs to bring specialty products to the chemistry that they're working with. Right.
And I think a big plus, I'll just add from outside looking in, I know one of the things that Hubbard-Hall does, not only just supplies the chemistry, but really helps the application of this. I know it's very difficult to get a lot of the etching right, of the metal treat in the wastewater right. So I can think that's a lot of things that you all do just besides supplying it, is walking people through these processes, especially when they run into issues, whether materials change for them and now they're trying to do it a little different type. So that's often a big part of it, I think, is where the Hubbard-Hall people jump in, is to help people with those products to get to the end, the quality that they need to meet, because it seems like it's a very high quality industry.
Yeah, that's correct. And particularly over the last couple of years is managing the distribution and warehousing of these materials to ensure that they don't shut down their lines. Running a fab is extremely costly, and if they can't get the materials that they need to run their parts, then it's a big challenge. And proudly, I'll say that we haven't shut down our customers, and we've done everything we possibly can, bending over backwards, increasing our storage so that these strategic customers do not shut down. And I'm proud to say that we haven't shut anyone down through this supply chain crisis that we've been dealing with.
Yeah, it's been touch and go with a lot of people. That's great. The biggest one we hear with, not that you have anything to do with it, but the biggest we hear with issues coming out of this is the chip shortages in the automotive industry and also in consumer electronics. Where I live in Ohio, I know just maybe 40, 50 miles down the road, there's a abandoned racetrack with over 100,000 brand new automobiles sitting there that are completed and waiting for chips. And it keeps getting replenished. But that's the biggest thing that everybody hears with the news, is that, these cars, it's why cars are more expensive. It's why they're delayed, is that the chips, the car's completely built, but the chips aren't there. So talk to me a little bit about what you've seen in the past few years and related to that, about the supply chain of, chip manufacturing, especially here in the U.S.
Yeah. So as it relates particularly to automobiles, so, computers, phones, and so forth, it seems to be that the chip producers have been able to keep up with that demand. Where we've seen that chip suppliers are not able to keep up is when the automobile industry, and that's predominantly driven, I found out this fact from one of our customers, the EV space, so the electric vehicle space, actually requires 4 times the amount of chips that a regular automobile requires. And as we see this demand for EV pick up, there's more pressure on these chip suppliers to keep up. And quite frankly, it's so much that they're having a hard time. And as you dial back to COVID, a lot of the automobiles manufacturers didn't know what was going to happen and what the demand was going to look like for automobiles. And so the chip fabs slowed down production predominantly for the automobile industry, and then things quickly flipped and ramped back up. So it's been a frantic pace to try to get back up and catch up with the demand, coupled with the 4x requirements, or 4 times the amount of chips that are required for the EV vehicles. So it's been challenging, particularly on the automobile space. Like you said, parking lots of vehicles waiting for chips because the demand has been so strong, and these fabs haven't been able to keep up. So we're seeing that is the backlog isn't as great as it once was, but it's still there. And at least 6 months to another 12 months, I would expect that we're going to see this continued backlog and uptick in demand. So
some I read where it's not just 1 or 2 chips. These cars, even produced today, have a dozen or more chips, right? I mean, they need a lot of these to go in. So if you're talking about an EV having 4 times, that's huge. That's a huge amount of chips that need to be manufactured and processed correctly and installed. So that's
correct.
That's a huge one. So let's talk about not get away from automotive a little bit and what's going on with that, but let's talk about what's driving the growth and trajectory of the semiconductor market. I know you're getting a lot of information from, your customers who are in this. What is it that they're seeing that's driving this, and is it going to be sustainable for the next couple of years?
Yeah. So what we're hearing is, as development in technology and development and the way that we act as humans, everything's moving towards computerization and using chips to help us in our daily lives. So the demand is only going to increase in that aspect. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this EV demand is also going to push us in a direction of higher demand. What also is interesting that's happening in the marketplace is the United States and the way that they want to approach the chip market from a macro perspective. So President Biden and his staff has passed what's called the CHIPS Act, which is funding to try to bring a lot of the chip production back here domestically to the United States. So it's a $250 billion incentive for these organizations to build chip fabs here in North America. And this is changing the landscape, quite frankly, here, particularly in North America, where a lot of these fabs left when globalization started to happen due to labor costs and so forth, economics. And we're seeing this coming back. And this is a big driver for what we see as the demand, particularly for our business in chemical distribution here in North America, is these fabs are going to be coming up in the next couple of years. And it's important for us to stay at the forefront of that so that we can help them as they come online and provide the chemistry that they need to keep their fabs running.
Right. Yeah, I know I'm here in Ohio, and I think maybe a month ago we had a big announcement right after I think the CHIPS Act was signed that a plant was coming here to Ohio that was going to be a $2 billion plant to build. I'm not sure who the manufacturer was. I know I read it, but I couldn't recall. But it seems like these are popping up a lot. I know in Arizona, I saw a couple more where these plants are building up. And I guess the thing being is that what we had with COVID, and then also the supply chain shortages, that people, they want it to be made here in the U.S., right? It seems like there's a reshoring of that effort to get it done here instead of halfway across the world, or across the world, basically.
Yeah, it's supply chain challenges. So having product here in the North America region, but then also a lot of innovation goes into making these chips and keeping that innovation here in North America as much as possible, rather than that innovation being shipped overseas and shared overseas. There's a lot of desire to keep it here. So yeah, you're right. Ohio announced a large chip fab going up in Ohio, upstate New York, North Carolina, Arizona, with with the spending, it's a lot of excitement in this particular category because a lot of growth is happening and a lot of new innovation coming into North America, which should ultimately be pretty exciting.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, where do you see this market going? Like I said, in the next 3 to 5 years? I know that, they're trying to build these facilities as fast as they can. I know a lot of finishers I talk to are trying to get into this industry. I know it's changing a lot. I was just talking to a company the other day. It was talking, they were making silver connectors in electronic components for automobiles. And the spec used to be, 2,000 to 3,000 insertions before erosion, took place. Now it's up to 10,000 is the spec, right? So the demand is there to really get this more reliable. But where do you see this going next? Like you said, and you may have touched on it just a bit there, the next 3 to 5 years, and also what's Hubbard-Hall doing, I guess, to kind of keep up with that and play a big role in that.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think where I see this going and where we see it going in the next 3 to 5 years, and everything I seem to be reading is only growing. So there's a lot of growth looking out for the next 3 to 5 years as these new fabs are coming on board and like you said, running as fast as they can to get these facilities built up. Where this helps us and how it plays out for Hubbard-Hall, when they build these fabs, they're multi-billion-dollar fabs. They don't want to be building a warehouse. And where we come into play is our chemical distribution and warehousing and our expertise in having knowledge, over 20 years of knowledge of how to handle these types of products and how to handle these types of customers. So over the next 3 to 5 years, as these fabs continue to grow and come online, it's critical for us as a chemical distribution company to be partnering with these customers to make sure that they know we're there and we're going to help them as they come online. And as I mentioned, there's no interest in them of building space to store these materials, but at the same time, it's extremely costly if they can't run consistently. So they need to have a partner close by, product available, and the know-how and expertise and strategic relationships that we have to help them keep their fab running. So where I see this going for the next 3 to 5 years is a lot of development and growth happening. And it's important for Hubbard-Hall as it plays out to make sure that we're partnering with these customers and allowing them to build the space that they need to make chips. And we're the warehousing and distribution partner and expert in helping them to bring that chemistry to their needs.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Like I said, so I don't think supply chain problems are going to decrease, but like I said, to have somebody who's on top of it and can really do that, I think that's what they're looking for in a partnership with that a lot, is someone that can really help them mitigate as much as they possibly can any problems that are coming up with that. So definitely.
Correct. Yeah.
All righty. Well, listen, I appreciate that. A lot of good information about the semiconductor, and I think it's going to be a very, very, in finishing, we talk about aerospace, automotive, and everything, but I think semiconductor is going to be getting up there very, very much with what a lot of finishing operations will be working with. So, but Carter, I appreciate you taking time out and explaining all that to us. And I'll let you get back to the warehouse and make sure you get all those supplies back in.
Great, Tim. Appreciate you taking the time to meet with me and discuss the market.
Thanks. Seen and Solved is brought to you by Hubbard-Hall. Better results, less chemistry. For more podcasts, go to hubbardhall.com or wherever you get your podcasts.